Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to another episode, episode 5 of Conscious Curiosity. I'm Modia Silva, the host, and through this series, I interview different people to see what it means to them about being conscious and being curious. In this episode, I love it because I'm going to be interviewing Suzanne Gibbs, who is an artist and an author who lives in California and has her art studio up over the border in Oregon. And she will talk all about being human, essentially. But she will talk about it through references to her book, which is called Conscious Curiosity. And so it made me think initially of a line that is attributed to King Solomon that says, "There's nothing new under the sun." So I had decided to create this podcast and call it Conscious Curiosity. And a couple of months after doing that, I came across this book called ... Conscious Curiosity. It's like, whoa, I thought I came up with that unique title. Anyway, it is a real pleasure, or it will be a pleasure for you, hopefully also, to hear what Suzanne has to say. She's going to talk a lot about learning about the power of self through book writing and through relationship. She will talk about happiness and grief and how the old tapes play in our head and messes up in our search or path to that. And we'll talk a bit about faith and then the responsibility to speak carefully and the question of, does speaking harshly or does swearing add or take away from a relationship? Because I'm also a Gestalt therapist, there's a little bit in there as well about the Gestalt prayer and how that fits or did fit into Suzanne's life and how I view it and how it fits into the power of relationship. So without further ado, enjoy please this episode and let me know, as usual, if there's anything that you would like to hear, and I'll do my best to create an episode to support you. Thanks, enjoy. Yeah.
Because I'm not a therapist. I'm just a human being that cares about paying attention to, life, the moments.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, maybe that's where we start, Suzanne,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm also careful with words as a therapist. And when you just said just, like I'm just, like I don't know that there's anything more needed than what you do, which is just pay attention to life. Like, or anything else, like being a therapist, being a doctor, being an accountant, like are just like jobs and labels. But
Yes.
I think the guts of life is just paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You said just twice in that explanation. Now that I've heard that word.
I say just all the time.
Yeah,
I do.
Okay.
I do. I actually
I'd be totally more aware of it now for a few days.
I teach I teach refugees and people who've experienced homelessness, and I help them set life goals and move towards their goals.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about language, the power of language, I point out how my Achilles heel is using the word just.
Yes.
And then over the course of a month that I'm with them, they are constantly saying, "Modia, you said just again." I was like, okay, I'm trying my best.
We're human, right?
Yeah. So Suzanne, it's thank you so much for coming on this show, this episode. The reason that I reached out to you, and for the audience, Suzanne lives in Northern California and has her art studio, just over the border up in Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And I came across Suzanne because she wrote a book right here, which you can probably get on Amazon, right? Still?
Yes, and
Yeah?
I also have like signed copies available directly from my Etsy shop.
Oh, cool. So you can go to Etsy and get signed copies. The book is called Conscious Curiosity, Communicating to Connect by Suzanne Gibbs, Gibbs. And for anyone watching this on YouTube as opposed to on a podcast, you'll see Suzanne's name across the bottom and a way to link over to get that book. So I'd love, over the course of our time together, Suzanne, to talk about some of the ideas that you pose in this book. But I actually want to start first by asking you about book writing.
Okay.
Because I decided last month that within 2 years from now, I'm going to have written a book. And so
Good for you.
yeah,
For
big
setting
challenge.
a realistic timeline.
Oh yeah, you think 2 years is realistic?
It took me a year to write and develop that book, but it took 20 years before that for me to gather all the ideas. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got my work cut out for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's so worth it though, because you learn so much through the process of what you're putting down, knowing that it's kind of a little bit more permanent than like a blog post or, a social media post. And so there's a deep underlying learning that comes from putting your voice down in a book.
Right. Oh, that's cool.
It still matters. In other words, a book really matters so much, even in this world of like tons of content. Yes.
Well, I think if you just said there's so much learning that it's not, I think I would say it's not just that the book matters, but you matter as the author of the book as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how would you say the book process, like that book writing process, has changed you? Like what are the big learnings or a big learning?
Well, when I started the process of writing it, I actually thought it was going to be sort of more like a booklet, like a, under 100 pages, little fun thing with some illustrations. But the more I dove into the topic that was important to me, which is, being really present in a relationship, whether it's with your children or with your significant other or even friendships, I realized like I kept opening more cans that I needed to answer for myself. And the book really came about because I couldn't find a book that was helping me to answer the questions I had. So I was answering my own by looking all over the place and asking questions. And I did have counseling before and during writing the book too, because those questions were so persistent at that time for myself.
Wow. So it sounds like a lot of bravery is required as well then.
Absolutely. You could say bravery, but I think it's just showing up for yourself every day a little bit. Like I said, when I first started out, I thought it was really small, and then it, kind of grew bigger. And so each time it grew bigger, the questions became something where I wanted to research it more. It's showing up for that belief inside myself, like this is worthwhile. I need to keep working forward. And I honestly did writing of some sort almost every day for a year to have that happen. It wasn't just, you read about people that go on these writing retreats, and for 40 days they go and they write the book and it's done. For me, it took a lot longer. I think in part because it was my first book. But also just because I started from a place of so many questions.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's great. We did an episode earlier where we actually talked about the question being more important than the answer sometimes. So
I'll have to go back and listen to that one. I hadn't caught that one of yours.
Yeah. So
isn't that what conscious curiosity really is like searching for the right question? Because there are wrong questions that you can go down that rabbit hole and not really grow or move from that research or that inquiry.
Right. And how would you know that?
You don't. Honestly, you really don't. Except for that at a certain point, there's a gut feeling like, oh, this isn't really what I wanted to know. So what is it that I really wanted to know? So it's asking again.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's embedded in the title, I would say. It's asking again with curiosity, like staying open
Yes.
to this may or may not be a useful question.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially since, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so it's a book about it is a book about relationships.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Why that? I mean, you could have written about
I
any.
could have written anything. Yeah. Um, the year that it came to me that that was what I was going to do is, it's so strange, a story, but anyway, I'll tell it. I had written a kind of a little pamphlet when my husband's brother got married, and there was illustrations because we had been married about 6 years or 7 years previous to him getting married. And I thought the best gift I can give him is like, this is what I've learned about being married so far. Right. And so I gave his brother and his new wife this little booklet. And then I made a copy for myself, which I always held on to. And the year that Conscious Curiosity, or the writing of it, started, I stumbled upon that booklet again at the same time that my parents were planning their 50th wedding anniversary. And so the two kind of just like smashed into each other. And I was in a position in my relationship where our kids were just finishing high school. So I knew that our relationship was going to drastically change within 2 years. So you can just imagine like those three kind of different paths converging in my brain. I was like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next for myself, for my husband, for us, for our children, for my parents, you know? And what is it that made it that they could be together for 50 years? And I had grandparents that had been together for 65 years. So I was like, I have some knowledge here because I have families that have figured out how to stay married. And from my vantage point, mostly happy. Like there's no such thing as permanently happy in a relationship, but there's mostly joy and mostly happiness. And so it made sense to kind of start the inquiry for myself on where do I want my relationship to move forward from these questions.
Nice.
I think I answered your question.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you did, and I just want to kind of expand it out. Or no, I want to ask you whether we changed the language just a tiny bit for the audience,
Okay.
because traditionally we merge relationship and marriage together and kind of treat it as the same. And
Correct.
nowadays, with people considering relationships in many, many different forms,
Absolutely. Good point.
I know that your background, as much as I got from your book, is a little more traditional.
It's way more traditional, and I am very aware of that. And I remember trying to write the book in a way that honors all types of relationships. I remember trying to be really careful about how I phrase things or how I ask people to ask each other questions.
Mm-hmm.
I can only speak from what I know, and that's my power in the book. But I am vastly aware that yeah, I agree. And I'm glad you brought that up because I hadn't said that in this, but there's so many ways that relationships can be long-term
Right.
without
Right.
the marriage tied to it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's clear in the book. And in addition to being clear, you're unapologetic about your own path and your own preferences, which I really like. I liked a lot when I read that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, I want to go, if I may, I'm going to grab the book. Along this line, there's an opening quote that you have on page, for anyone who has the book, on page XV. So for those Romans who are listening to this podcast, you guys would know that that's page 15 of the introduction. Can I just read it out? It's a quote from Fritz Perls, and it caught my attention because I'm a Gestalt therapist, and Fritz Perls, along with his wife Laura, were the founders of modern day Gestalt therapy. I do my thing and you do your thing. I am not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you are not in this world to live up to mine. You are you and I am I, and if by chance we find each other, it's beautiful. If not, it can't be helped. So I'm curious, can you talk about why that is essentially, after the table of contents, is your opening to the whole book?
I stumbled upon that quote in high school. I'm not sure what book I was studying or what literature class I was in, or who knows. But I remember reading it and just being bowled over by it, like, oh my gosh, there's so much truth in here. And I just felt like hugged by the statement, and supported and listened to. And I just can't even describe like the feeling that I had. I was like 15 probably.
Right.
I had just moved to the United States after living in Mexico and Brazil as a child, and I felt like complete fish out of water where I was and where I was living, and having a really, really difficult time even making one friend in high school. And so I think that quote allowed me to realize, like, all I have to be is myself, and at some point some other people will decide if they like me or not, and that's okay, and that's more than okay. And so
Right.
it just helped me to realize that if all I'm doing is, if what I shouldn't say all I'm doing, but if what I'm doing is spending an enormous time drawing and painting in the art studio because that's what's feeling comfortable then, and that is what felt comfortable back then, that's more than enough. Like, I was still learning, growing, thriving. I just didn't have friends,
Right.
and the friends came later for sure, because I kind of learned from that. I can almost quote that quote because there's times in my life where I bring it up in my head again. And so when I went to write this book, I was like, I searched for it so I could write it in its exactitude, not like my memory of it. And I still think it's true. And I think it's true very much in relationships. You can't have a strong and powerful and healthy relationship that moves forward for a long time unless both people in the relationship are strong and healthy and ready to move forward in their own life. So
Right. I agree. That's, for me, that speaks to the first part. And also I was an immigrant to Canada as a teenager.
oh wow,
And
okay.
I also, even though I came from an English-speaking country, I came from England, but it was impossible to make friends. I was just such an outsider, and I ended up with two friends who were both immigrants, like newly minted immigrant,
There you go. Yeah.
Canadians. And it was the first part of that, of Fritz Perl's quote, really does speak to my experience too. And but can I just share that, because the second part really disturbs me, not really disturbs me.
So of his quote or of what I said?
No, of his quote,
Okay.
Yeah,
Say it
where,
again.
okay, you are you and I am I. If by chance we find each other, it's beautiful, and if not, it can't be helped. And to me, that piece feels, or sounds and feels, a lot like the me generation of the 60s in America, that it's all about me, and if you fit into my orbit, great, and if you don't, go your own way, because it's my orbit. And
it's interesting because I didn't take it that way.
yeah,
But maybe I'm a different generation, so I don't know.
yeah, because for me, like, therapy is very much about working at the boundary of connection and looking for the quality of that connection, as opposed to, oh, we just don't connect, let's go our own ways.
Yeah, I see how it could be read that way. It
Yeah.
can't be helped. It's almost a Debbie Downer, right?
Well,
well, okay, but here's another thing is maybe it can't be helped in that moment, but that doesn't mean that a month later you're like, I really do think I want to help myself, and I do want to work towards a relationship, or I do want to work towards changing this or that in my life. And so I think if you read it from the standpoint of that moment rather than a forever blanket statement of never,
right.
then I think there is power in it.
Yeah. Okay, I can see that too, because Gestalt is very much about the here and now, and recognizing that every moment changes from the previous
You just
moment.
taught me something, because I don't really know anything about Gestalt. But there you go. Like I really did always think of it as just in this moment rather than in a forever sense.
Right.
So.
Right. Nice. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to go away and think more about that. There's something else you wrote about that I have to think a lot more about, which is the word faith, because it's such a loaded word in English, probably in every language. But
Faith, religion, God, the whole,
yeah,
yeah,
right,
spirituality, and yeah, it's so loaded right now.
right.
But
And
go ahead.
so you say in the book that you need faith. And so
Mhm.
can I ask you as like an open question, like what is faith for you?
That's a big question. It's an even harder question with things that have been going on in the world and in America right now. Like,
Uh,
yeah. Uh, hmm.
it is.
Yeah,
Well,
you hit a heavy one.
it, well,
uh,
yeah, and I realize it's a heavier question asking an American that as well right now.
Absolutely, because things are rough. I mean, we just passed a 500,000 coronavirus, yeah,
Right,
deaths.
right. Deaths, right.
That
Not
that's not
infection.
even cases, that's
Right.
death. And that is rough. And it didn't have to be.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
And as sad as that is, there's more to America too. And it's like you
yeah,
didn't have to go through the lead up to your election that you went through,
exactly.
or the post election that you went through either. And
Right.
yeah,
Uh, okay, so that is where faith comes in, though, is because I do feel like this kind of, I'll call it a shakeout or whatever. It's all meant to happen. Do I have faith that everything's going to come out on the other end just how I want it? No, I'm not that rosy about life. But I do think that the shakeout, these changes, like, for example, all the deaths and all the horribleness that's happening with the weather pattern in Texas and stuff, like, where does faith come in all this? Like, I think that each of these things that happen gives us as a human more opportunity to learn about how to be a human. And I'm not even going to say a better human or a worse human, but just it keeps helping us to learn to take the next step.
right.
So I guess that's my
Right.
faith, is just that it's heavy. Like, you know, I'm sensitive right now as I'm talking, like I'm coming from a place where I'm comfortable. I have a roof over my head. I have food in my belly, I have people in my family and friends that love me. And so I don't have it, even though I have had times over the last 12 months where I've felt melancholy, I have not dived into depression yet. And there's a really fine line difference there for me. Um, it, and I'm completely aware as I talk, there's millions of people that are feeling depressed right now, that are feeling like there is no faith, there is no hope. So I guess faith and hope are very closely tied.
Right.
Did you
Yeah.
really want to talk about these heavy
I
topics?
know.
Gosh, I had no idea. Oh, you're really testing my boundaries of what I think and know without,
Oh, really?
yeah, just
Oh, because for me also, I don't know, I don't know where any episode is going to go on conscious
right.
curiosity. And so
Yeah.
for me at a personal level, like faith is a big question or a big word, because I have to have faith that that you and I will connect in a way that's meaningful and that it'll be useful to the audience
I
or
know.
interesting and useful and entertaining and all those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then let go of my expectation about, well, what's the next moment going to bring? What's the next moment? Do I have to have another question in my head to ask
Mhm.
Suzanne as soon as there's a pause? Or can I just have faith that we're just going to flow in a nice way and in one moment
Right.
we'll move to the next? And like, so those
And
people,
maybe that is what faith is that you you allow for that next moment to be a different moment. Allow
right.
for it to open itself up to you. Allow for a little bit of light.
Uh-huh. Which
Yeah.
is, from my perspective, like a crack in opening the door for people who are in depressive states or in anxious states, is
Mm-hmm.
that if they can let go just for a moment of whatever past they're
Of
holding on
that
to.
swirl that's,
Yeah,
yeah.
or let go of the anxious future that they're holding on to and just drop into the present moment, just dip a toe in the water and then come back out. Then
And
that.
so what you're saying makes me think that faith a lot of the time comes from your soul and your heart, whereas the rest of it, the less faithful or the less pleasant parts of it definitely come from our mind swirling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, our heart can't swirl into depression, but our mind sure can and will.
Right.
Mhm. So I
Yes.
think faith comes from our soul, from our heart, from our being, rather than our mental state.
Right. I think it also, so I also distinguish between faith and trust. And an example that I like to distinguish between those two is if I stand, okay, so I'm in Canada, so I can talk about frozen lakes. So if I stand at the
Look in
edge,
Texas right now, but go ahead.
oh, that's true. That's true. Texans can too. And I'm sure the lakes are bigger than ours.
Oh, what a mess. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So if I stand at the edge of a lake and someone tells me that the ice is at least 6 inches thick and it can take up to 2,000 pounds or whatever weight it can sustain, and they show me the math, and then I'm going to have faith that I could walk out onto the lake and I won't fall, I won't crack, and like the ice won't crack and me fall through.
Mhm.
But trust includes the action as well. So I have the faith as I stand on the edge. As soon as I step out onto the lake, I've moved it into trust. That's my definition of faith and trust.
Okay.
But
But
so,
aren't you also trusting the person that said that in the first place? It's not about the faith in that person. It's also the trust in the person that said, I don't know. Yeah. I hear what you're saying though.
yeah, yeah. But it's my, yeah,
They're very linked.
they are very linked. And so I wonder, like, back to relationships, how does faith or trust play out in what, like in your book, you're really talking about primary relationships.
Right. It plays out in that knowing that even when you're at your most vulnerable, or when you have something to say that might make the other person angry, that you still trust that they want to keep the relationship moving forward together, rather than I'm done with you,
Right. Right.
um, yeah.
That's nice, because then it gives you permission to say something that might be, risky, or might
Absolutely.
cause
Yeah.
might cause friction. But
Yeah.
both parties are staying. They're not going to run to the front door and run.
Yeah. Language is so important though, for both people. Like learning I statements over you statements is like a really critical part to all that. And even if you haven't learned that, to learn to recognize that in yourself and others. Like, you've just said a you statement and that hurts because I'm not sure that's what it really means, or I'm not sure you're really saying something that makes sense to me right now. Can you rephrase that as an I statement? What are you feeling? And so it's like
Right.
this constant, like, give take question. Yeah.
Right. Nice. And I hear some of my clients use we statements when they're talking about their relationship with their partner or whatever. And it's like, it's actually not a we statement. It just like, you can't say we are feeling this way. Like, change
There's
it.
still two humans and there's still two silent. Yeah, there is no, yeah.
Right. So just say I, and it'll get to the root of it faster. Yeah, I like that. There's something that you talk about. You talk about happiness in the book. And can I just say, you say finding happiness comes from moving deeper into conversation.
I wrote this book, I think it's 6 years ago now, 4 years ago. And I will stand to those words being still true, that even when it hurts to go deeper into a conversation, and even though it's uncomfortable, there is more happiness through that, because you're learning.
Uh,
either something about yourself or something about the other person that you might not have known. It's like, oh, so that aha might come, it comes a little later. It might even come a day or even a week later. Like,
mm,
oh, I had that conversation and I just, yeah.
right.
I'll give an example. Like, just 2 weeks ago, I was on a trip with my husband to go see our kids. We hadn't seen them in a year because of COVID. And I was in the hotel room and I woke up one morning just lamenting, like, I'm the one taking care of the dogs. You guys get to go skiing. And I was just like in this like attitude. And then he got angry. And then because he's like, you've got it so, whatever. He got angry. And something just clicked with me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just playing an old tape because we're together as a family. It hasn't happened in a while. And this old tape that I'm playing and, it's not real anymore, And so that's what I think I mean by that happiness is like, if you can really dive into that discomfort and face up to it. And it's very much like grief is like that too. You have to go towards it in order to find the happiness.
Uh-huh. Or let the happiness emerge or bubble up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, happiness is such a strange word. And I think I almost need to talk about that too, is, in this culture, we think happiness is what we're all after, right? It's like
Mhm.
fame, money, happiness. Like those three have to happen or life sucks.
Right.
And I don't think happiness is a state that's a permanent state. And when I wrote the book, I thought that maybe it could, but I think I've kind of grown a little bit since then and realized that there really is no such thing as permanent happiness. But I do think that even when you're not happy, there is the idea that every day can have moments of joy.
Uh-huh.
And so that just makes me so much more happy to know, right? Like even
Right.
when I'm feeling crappy, I can have joyous moments during my day. And so like just having come to that like distinction is totally changed my viewpoint uh, uh, on the idea of happiness.
Right. I
I
wonder,
lost my train.
yeah, I wonder if one of the words that needs to be thrown into this little bubble then around happiness and joy is contentment. That
Mhm.
as I hear you say, in my day, there are moments of joy that bubble up. And then there are other times where I'm just feeling crappy. That if I can be content with that experience, that might be happiness.
Maybe, yeah. Content feels loaded for me because it's almost like it's not allowing for the fact that there are low points in every day or there are frustrations or
Uh-huh. But can you not be content knowing that that is the way life is?
oh sure, good point, yeah, yeah,
Huh. These are all great,
yeah.
great topics that are
We're
making
not
me.
going in light here, are we?
We're not what? Sorry, I
We're
missed that.
not going in light here, are we?
No, we're not.
Ideas.
No, no.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting because I'm feeling like every time I think of something, I'm thinking I feel a little nervous. I was like, oh, is that one going to be even heavier now, or is that like what does my audience actually want to hear? Do they want light? Do they want entertainment? Or do they want deep? Or,
Right.
yeah. And then that, because you're talking about tapes in your head, like that tape is playing in my head. And then it's like, oh, that tape is getting in the way of me just having a nice connection with Suzanne and having, just a chat that flows.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
interrupting it with these thoughts. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry that your tape turned on.
Oh, it turns on a lot. um, Talking about turning on or like revealing, you open up a lot in the book. Like it's a
Mhm.
very personal book where you share a lot about you and your family and the dynamics and
Mhm.
who you are with your foibles and your strengths. And how do you deal with that? Like how has that been for you to open up to that extent?
It hasn't really been that tough because I didn't have a huge audience that, how do I explain it? I guess, okay, so while I was writing it, I had a very serious altercation with my mother and father. I think I even wrote about it in the book, where they actually threatened to disown me because I was writing it, even though I was writing it in honor of their long-term marriage. And they hadn't read it yet. They just thought that I shouldn't be doing it. So I guess once I got past that altercation and came to a place where I was like, no, this book really has to live. Um, Once it's published and a book lives, there's a little bit of a removal that happens. Like I can't control what other people are going to think about me or about the ideas in the book. I can only live my own life. And so I think that altercation we had helped me to kind of learn that before I even released the book fully to the public.
Wow.
I had a really wonderful group of about 12 women that knew about the book, knew I was writing it, knew parts of it. They never all knew all of it. So that support group was really amazing to me. Like they were like totally cheering me on, like you definitely have to write this, and they only all knew different parts of it. But so I had built in my own success into how I produced it, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. And I like what you just said about you put it out there and then it's not in your control anymore. And so you have
Correct.
to come, like, which makes me think about a relationship as well, that I put words out there, say to whoever I'm connecting with, and then those words are no longer in my control. They're out there. And all I can do is come back and support myself and wait for a response, or, or decide that I'm going to add more to it, or whatever it is.
My red flags went up when you said that, though, because I think that we have a responsibility to be careful about what it is we are saying and not like spew out nastiness.
Right. And sometimes I spew out nastiness, right? Or sometimes like I raise my voice to my kids, or
yeah, we're human.
Right.
Yeah.
And so so I'm not absolving myself of responsibility to correct mistakes. But at some level it's out there, and now I have to wait to see what the response is.
Yeah.
Like sometimes, like with a client, sometimes I'm harsh. Usually I ask permission first to be harsh. But just because I'm nice. But then I go harsh. And so the words are out there. And then sometimes it really pays off. It's like they needed that level of, firmness or discipline or whatever it was.
I'm hearing kick in the butt, but you can call it firmness if you like. Get yourself together, man. No. You can't talk like that, I know, because it's a professional thing. I'll say it for you. Which is a lot of what that book was about for me, is some of that, like kicking my own, getting my own shit together. Are we allowed to swear? You can beat me out.
Well, anyway, you just did. You just did.
Yeah. I know.
There's no big like do TV channels have some sort of overarching authority that bleeps out words? Yeah. I think so. No, they have standards.
Who knows? Yeah.
We don't on podcasts. Okay. Yeah.
My kids told me they learned all their swear words except for one directly from my mouth. So thank you, children, for letting me know how real I am.
That's a nice gift. You can share if you want, but you don't have to, what the working title of your book was then, since you just said that.
Oh my goodness. The working title was, and I still wish I had had the guts to do it, but again, relationships are important to me and I didn't want to destroy some family relationships. It was Suck My Dick and Lick My Pussy. And that was because I raised two boys that, like I just mentioned, felt comfortable using swear words in our house, because I felt like just trying to tell them not to use particular words wasn't the best way for me to keep the communication channels open between us. And so they learned by high school that let's see how much we can poke fun at mom about this idea of we are allowed to use swear words. And they would use them repeatedly and too much,
Right.
just to see if they could rise
Right.
right, yeah, just get me angry or get me frustrated or whatever. And so it got to a point where I would use swear words back.
Uh-huh.
And what's beautiful about it is that it kind of like deflates the swear word when mom's swearing back, right? Like all of a sudden they're like, oh man, she's not picking up this argument. So
Right.
then we end up in a real and healthy and fun and direct conversation about school, about their friends, about life, about finances, about whatever it is. And it's still true to this day when our family is together. Like they'll try to rile me up, but they can only get so far where I'm like, oh gosh, you guys are doing it again. And then the conversation goes a little deeper. And I love that. I love that I've been able to be open to the jeers, basically.
Right.
Even if it's really uncomfortable swear words.
Yeah. I like that. I like it. It just made me think of some of my kids were around the meal table a number of years ago, and my youngest was probably like 4 or 5, maybe 5 at the time, and dropped the F word. And I looked, and the other kids were like, their eyes went huge, and it's like, what's dad gonna do now?
Yeah.
And so I just looked at her and I said, you like that word, hey? And she's like, yeah. I was like, say it as many times as you want right now, because then after that, we're going to talk about, whether it's a good word to use and where to use it and not use it. And
yeah.
And so she just went for it. It was just like, fuck, 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 fuck. There's little.
Totally relate to our suck my dick conversations. It was ridiculous that weekend, but yeah.
But it shifted. But you're right.
It
shifted the relationship.
Instead of being like the punitive parent or the like, you can't say that or don't do that, and if you're constantly doing that, you're not opening up the possibility to human discourse,
right,
and enjoyment of each other's company. So
right, and acceptance, and
that's a big one. Acceptance. Yeah.
Cool. Can I ask you one more question? It might be heavy as well. Maybe.
Oh, lovely. Let's try this. Sure.
So you say in your book, I'm going to quote, "I'm learning to tune into my complaining and make changes, and I believe you can too." So can you take us on a tour of how you address your own complaining once the voice kicks in, like once the tape starts up, and then what that does for you with relationships?
So it's similar to the story I shared just a few minutes ago on this podcast, where I heard myself kind of playing an old like whiner, poor me tape. I'm not going to say it's easy to like just step out of that poor me tape. It is not easy at all, but it is possible. And it ultimately feels really good when you can. Like, it's like sort of like a snake shedding their skin, right? Like, I don't need to talk that way anymore. I don't need to think that anymore. And yeah, it might pop up again a month later and you're like, oh shoot, here it is again,
Right.
But you can shed it again, and you can just keep trying, and you can just keep trying and keep trying. And
the more,
again, that's part of being human. I know I've said that so many times on this podcast about being human, but we are messy and we are complicated, and allowing for that and embracing that can help us to be more human.
Yeah.
So
right.
and more
I love it. I love it. And embracing our messiness. That might be.
Yeah.
That's the title of the book I'm going to write in 2 years.
Embrace our messiness. There is one already out there for creatives, but not written from the perspective of therapy. So it might be interesting.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So Suzanne, this is awesome. Thank you so much. I like to finish our episodes by asking you, I would like to finish it by asking you 3 questions.
Okay.
And
these are lighter, right? No.
Well, let's see. So hopefully they're lighter. The first question then is, what is your superpower? Is that light?
It's not, but I'll let it be light. I'm sensitive and intuitive.
Cool.
Yes.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Second question is, if you have a book sitting on your bedside table right now, what are you reading right now?
I just finished A Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. Loved it. It's like a historical fiction that happens in Kentucky, and I loved it.
Okay, nice. Cool. Okay, and the third question is, I have this little book that I found at like a little free library that people put outside their houses. And there's a question on each page.
Okay.
So I'm going to flip through the book and you say stop, and that's the question. That's the third question.
Stop.
Okay. The question is, if you don't have all the things you want, are you grateful for all the things you don't have that you didn't want? What? There's a lot of negative, double negative, triple negatives in there.
Yeah, I'm not sure I like all the negatives, but I'll answer that by just kind of ignoring the double negatives and saying that a lot of what we've talked about here today, about happiness versus joy and contentment, and faith, even we had a long discussion on faith, all of that for me finds grounding in the daily practice of waking up and thinking of things that I'm grateful for that day that are going to happen. Like I was excited to be here with you. And then before I go to bed at night, just kind of going through a little list of what I'm grateful for, even if all it is like, I was alive today and I pooped today,
Right.
because a practice of gratitude can really make a difference in life.
Yeah, absolutely. I do a gratitude thing every day, when I take my kids to school, that everyone goes around in the car and says one thing that they're grateful for. And it's everything from, my little pinky, or I took a breath, or, to big things. Hopefully sometimes they include that I'm grateful my dad is driving me to school, but
Yeah, every once in a while, it's nice to hear that you're loved, right?
that's a bonus.
And you're not being taken, for granted.
Right. So Suzanne, it's been wonderful.
Yeah, I
spending this
really
time with
enjoyed
you.
meeting you. I'm very grateful for our time together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And so, audience who are watching this or seeing this, the book is called Conscious Curiosity by Suzanne Gibbs, Gibbs, and you can get it signed on the Etsy website, or you can go to Amazon and get, like I did, and get an unsigned copy. But it's a great read, and so it's really been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Sure. Everything about me, and if you want to learn more, is on my website, SuzanneGibbs.com. There's links to all sorts of things. Thank you.
Perfect. SuzanneGibbs.com.
Mhm.
All right. Take care, everyone, and thanks for joining us.
You have a great rest of your day.
You too.